Now, what do I mean when I say habitat suitability? When I say that the habitat is suitable for a species? Do I mean other places where the species would live happily and thrive if it could get there? Or do I mean other places where the species is likely to be found? These two are not the same thing. And what I mean is the first one. Habitat suitability that you get from species distribution modeling is for the entire landscape. You'll get these habitat suitability measurements which tell you other places where the species would live happily and thrive if it could get there, and it would show you other places where the species could not live happily and thrive even if it could get there, and everything in between. The point is that never say that species distribution modeling shows you the places, shows you the probability of where the species would be found somewhere. It does not. And this is because species distribution modeling is based on the fundamental niche. Species distribution modeling sort of shows you the fundamental niche of a species, although not quite. It more so shows you the fundamental niche than it shows you the realized niche, and I'll describe both. The fundamental niche of a species is the range of environments within which a species can maintain a population that reproduces frequently enough that the population does not shrink. So think about it. If I took you know, some ants and I put them in an environment where there was very little food, the population size of the ants would shrink. The ants wouldn't do very well. Eventually they'd die and there'd be no more ants left. That would mean that that environment with that low food is outside of the fundamental niche of the ants. The ants cannot live happily and reproduce and survive in that environment where there's not enough food. On the other hand, an environment where there's a lot of food, that's within the fundamental niche of an ant. The ants in that environment can thrive, reproduce, grow in population size, or at least stay the same in population size. So that's the fundamental niche. The fundamental niche is the range of environments within which the species can persist, that it can eke out a living, that it can survive. In other words, the fundamental niche is the range of environments where a species could be found. The fundamental niche is not the range of environments where the species is found, because there are other factors that could keep a species from being found in some environments. So for instance, maybe a particular species of ant could be found in cooler temperatures, but in those cooler temperatures, there's a frog that eats those ants. So even though the environment is hospitable to the ants at those colder temperatures, within those colder temperatures you find this frog that eats the ants, so they aren't actually found in that environment. So the fundamental niche tells you the environments within which a species could be found. It doesn't necessarily tell you that they will be found there. Another example, maybe an island has really great habitat for a particular species of deer. But if the island is so isolated from any landmass, the deer still aren't going to be found in that environment, even though they would really thrive when they got there, because there's no way for them to get to that island. So species distribution modeling shows you the fundamental niche, which shows you the range of environments where the species could be found, not where it necessarily is found. The fundamental niche does not consider interactions between species or the ability of species to disperse to different patches of habitat. It only considers what sets of environmental factors a species can tolerate. So that's why the fundamental niche doesn't show you where the species will be found. It doesn't consider frogs that might be eating the ants in colder temperatures. The fundamental niche doesn't consider the island habitats that are too far away. The fundamental niche only looks at the habitat and says, yeah, this looks like great habitat. The ants would love it here. A fundamental niche is not the same thing as a realized niche. If you're talking with somebody in science and they're talking about a niche, you need to find out if they're talking about a realized niche or a fundamental niche. So make a note of that. The realized niche is the range of environments where the species is actually found. And again, this could be a narrower range of environments. So maybe a particular ant species isn't found in all of the environments where it could theoretically tolerate living, because there's this frog that lives in these colder temperatures that eats the ant and keeps it from being able to persist in those colder temperatures. So the realized niche is a subset of the fundamental niche. The realized niche is a subset of the environments, of all possible environments where the species could be found. And it's just that narrower range of environments where the species is actually found. This is a graphical representation of what I was just telling you. On the x-axis here is temperature. So we could go from 0 degrees to 40 degrees Celsius. And the y-axis here is precipitation, where we go from a desert environment up to a very wet environment. So you can imagine that there's some range of conditions within which, let's say, a particular frog species is actually found. But then you can imagine that there would be a larger range of both temperature and precipitation conditions within which the frog could actually live if it wasn't for competition with other species or predation by other species in those other environments, and if it wasn't for the fact that some of those environments are in places that the frog can't get to, something like that. So the realized niche is a subset of the fundamental niche. Anyway, back to the fundamental niche. So if we're talking about a frog species, sorry to switch examples here from ants to frogs, but my slides are for frogs. So imagine that this range of temperature and precipitation conditions are all the conditions within which this frog can survive. And outside of those conditions, the frog is dead. So how are you going to find this out? How are you going to find out this range of temperature and precipitation conditions within which the frog can survive? Well, one thing you could do is you could grow the frog or the particular species across a range of different temperatures, ranging from very cold to inhospitably hot. And you could record the temperatures at which the frog doesn't die. So that would show you the realized niche for the frog. You could do the same thing with precipitation. You could keep the frog in very wet conditions and very dry conditions, and you could, this particular species, different members of the species, and you could record the conditions under which the frog doesn't die versus when it does. So this range of precipitation conditions here is the range of precipitation conditions that are its fundamental niche. And then you can put those two things together. So you have a range of temperatures within which the frog can survive. And then you have a range of precipitation within which the frog can survive. So you can grow the frogs more accurately. You can grow the frogs under different combinations of temperature and moisture and find the exact combinations of temperature and moisture within which the frogs can survive and those within which they die. So therefore, it's not just one species anymore. Then you can start to generate that circular pattern of the combination of moisture and temperature within which the frog can theoretically live without dying. But what if you have more than two environments? And certainly anytime you do species distribution modeling, you're going to have more than two environments. So imagine how complicated that graph would be. Rather than just, I don't know, I guess this is about 64 different environments within which you'd have to grow the frogs. If you added another environmental variable, that would be like another axis of the graph coming out of the screen at you, making it 3D. You would then have many more than 64 environments you'd have to try growing the frogs in. You'd have to try growing them in different combinations of temperature, moisture, and acidity. And it would get multiplicatively more and more environments that you'd have to raise these frogs in. It just you wouldn't have the money or the resources available to grow the frogs under all those conditions. So you can't actually measure all of the different environments that are important to a frog. So you can't actually measure the full fundamental niche of this frog. The problem gets worse. What if you want to know the fundamental niche of a humpback whale? What if you want to know the fundamental niche of these sequoia trees? These are organisms that are too large and have far too large generation times to grow them in the laboratory and see under what range of conditions they live versus under what range of conditions they die. It would also be unethical because both humpback whales and sequoias are threatened species. Similarly with panda bears. Or what if you want to do the fundamental niche for an extinct animal like the saber-toothed cat? You can't grow saber-toothed cats under different conditions and see which ones they live in and which ones they die in because they're dead. So I mean, it's a problem. I mean, you know, what are you going to do to figure out the fundamental niche? Kill a bunch of pandas? Of course not. So species distribution models give you a tool to find the fundamental niche of a species without having to grow that species under a bunch of different environments and find all the environments in which they don't die. So by using species distribution modeling, you can find the places where the species is, record the GPS coordinates of those places. You can see what the environment is like at those places because you can use this environmental data that covers the entire United States or the entire world, and you can find out what the environment is like at those places where they live. And you can make a series of equations relating the environment at the places where they live to how suitable the habitat is, and with the general assumption that the places where you found most of the species, those are the places that they like the most, and the places where you didn't find the species as much, they didn't like as much. So it's a way that you can find the fundamental niche approximately. It's not exactly the fundamental niche without having to grow you know, members of a species in the lab and under a bunch of conditions and see when they don't die. So you can do species distribution modeling. In the next video, I am going to talk to you about different types of species distribution modeling and how they work.